What if the Electoral College wasn't so racist after all? I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle Now. And Bill, I just read a column by a professor at Princeton University whose name is Sean Willentz, who is author of a book that came out last September, and I want to read the name of the title of the book. The title of the book is No Property in Man, Slavery and Anti-Slavery at the Nation's Founding. So he's a scholar of history. Sean Willentz published this column in the New York Times saying, I was wrong about the Electoral College being a racist institution. Now, I'm not going to go into all the details of it, but first, at first blush, what do you think when you hear that the New York Times ran a column from somebody who basically said it wasn't a bunch of racists who instituted the Electoral College? I was wrong.
My first reaction is that it was written by former Princeton University professor, whatever his name is.
Or future former.
Yeah, by now, by airtime, I'm sure it's former.
Well, he says that he had initially thought, because there were slaveholders who wrote this thing, and because some of the arguments made by some of those slaveholders were concerned with the southern states losing power, that seemed to be the smoking gun, so to speak. I'm using the term, he didn't. Mm-hmm. But what he says was that, and I'll read a quote from this New York Times column. He talks about several competing plans for the electing of the president, from popular vote that would elect the president, which people were afraid of the, kind of democratic contagion that can sweep people away, to Congress electing the president, and people were concerned there about too much political manipulation or about Congress being, or the executive being subservient to the legislative body, and so they didn't want Congress to pick the president. Here it is. The alternative, quote, he says, and winning plan, which became known as the Electoral College only some years later, certainly gave the slaveholding states the advantage of the 3/5 clause, but the connection was incidental and no more an advantage than if Congress had been named the electors.
Precisely.
And
Precisely.
In fact, he points out that there's an old canard about Thomas Jefferson, having been elected because of the fact that the southern states were stronger because of the 3/5 clause. And he said, no, in fact, that wasn't the case at all.
No, of course not. There was, it's funny you mentioned that, because I was just reading an excellent book called Six Frigates about the birth of the U.S. Navy and leading up to the War of 1812. And the author repeatedly referred to the Virginia dynasty. So George Washington was a Virginia planter, John Adams from Massachusetts, but then Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, all of them were Virginians. And if Virginia wasn't, I don't think, the richest colony, probably New York was, but it was up there. It's not like Virginia was a poor colony. The Electoral College was designed to protect places like Rhode Island.
The small states, that's right.
Yes. And Virginia was by no means an underpopulated or small economy. It was one of the powerhouses of the colonies. The Electoral College, to say that it's racist, is, if you're going to say that something is racist, you have to point to something in the design of that institution that makes a discrimination on racial lines.
Well, basically, they're saying its strength. The people who make that argument, and they still make that argument today, and in fact, Democrats in this campaign season for president are talking about repealing the Electoral College, and one of the reasons is because of its racist roots. But basically, they're saying because slaves were counted for the purposes of congressional apportionment as 3/5, essentially, as they like to say, 3/5 of a man, which isn't exactly what it says either. But because of that, the South was overrepresented because they counted persons who were not able to vote,
right? And so because
who were in bondage,
and because of this unfair overrepresentation, the South became an enormous economic powerhouse, and eventually defeated the North in the war between the states. Just utterly crushed the North because of this unfair advantage they have. Listen, whatever moral taint you want to assign to the southern states in slavery, and I'm not saying that in a flip way. I'm not saying like you shouldn't, but whatever you want to lay on those states that not only allowed slavery but depended on slavery, those advantages were wiped out at the end of the Civil War. I hear people say that slaves built America. That's just plain not true. It is absolutely true that large numbers of black workers helped build America. Slaves built the cotton economy and the plantation economy. There's no question about that either. But that entire economy was destroyed after the Civil War. And so to the degree that they may have received some sort of advantage out of it, it certainly didn't come out to be a long-term advantage for them, because the entire Confederacy was essentially razed to the ground. They were governed by Republicans in Reconstruction for anywhere from 7-8 years to 13 or 14 or 15. That all of the first black representatives and Speaker of the House and so on, all Republicans from the 1800s. And so I think that this idea that the Electoral College is racist is just plain wrong. What the Electoral College is, however, is, I don't want to say rural, but I'm just going to go with that term as opposed to urban. In other words, the entire purpose of the Electoral College is to make sure that all of the states in the Union, which means that every single person that lives in the country, has some value to a candidate who is running for president. So, because the way the Electoral College is structured, a president who wants to become president of the United States has to listen to the demands of, the complaints of, and the hopes of people from all across the country, and not just what's going on in New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, San Francisco, and a few other cities.
And the way that is accomplished basically is a state like New Jersey, which was a small state, by the way, at that time. Mm-hmm. A state like New Jersey would get the number of electors equivalent to the number of representatives and senators from that state. So they're going to get 2 Senate representatives, basically, and so is Virginia. Now, Virginia had more electors because they had more House members, but at least that it was helped to be counterbalanced a little bit by the 2 members from the Senate.
Correct. And for the idiots who say that the Electoral College eliminates the votes of California and elevates the votes of Montana, let's say, how many? Do you know how many electoral votes does Montana have? Do you know? Is it 1 or 2 or something like that?
I lost count.
Wyoming, something like that. Well, California has 54. So to say that there's no proportional representation in this is just a flat-out lie. But much more importantly than this, and this is something that nobody seems to be talking about. We talk about the United States, we talk about America, and I'm talking about America in 2019. The situation I'm about to describe was much more pronounced throughout our history, but it still exists today. We talk about America as if it's a country, and it is a country. But when you really think about it, America is a federation of at least 7 tribes, at least 7 different kinds of communities. In other words, Maine fishermen are very different than people who live in the Arizona desert, who are very different than the people who work in the Rust Belt in Michigan, who are very different than the people who live on the coast in California. If you want to take the actual state borders out of it, what you are doing is you have to understand that you've got a country, a very polyglot country that has a number of different people. We cover the entire continent, the entire width of the North American continent, and the Creoles, and the Louisiana kind of French subculture, all of it. And so if we're going to agree that one person is going to have executive authority over all of these different interests, that person, and this is not only not a flip way to describe it, it is an essential way to describe the process. What that means is that if somebody's going to run for president, then they have to go down to Baton Rouge, and they have to go to a crawdad fry, and they have to these are some of the best crawdaddies I ever had. And then the next jet they take later on that afternoon, they're going to have to go up and eat some clam chowder up in Maine, and then they're going to have to go to Portland and have some granola, and then they're going to have to go down to California and sip a fine Chardonnay and all the rest of this nonsense. But
it occurs to me, Bill, in that argument that people from the left should actually embrace the Electoral College, because it's the people from the left who are always crying the loudest about offenses like cultural appropriation. Without the Electoral College, we're talking about cultural decimation, cultural
Correct.
Destruction, cultural homogenization.
And the reason that the Democrats want to eliminate the Electoral College is because if the Electoral College is eliminated, then the President of the United States doesn't have to appear anywhere or appeal to anyone other than the residents of large industrial cities. In other words, the population becomes more and more concentrated into cities on a yearly basis, and therefore, without the Electoral College, all I have to do essentially is to promise to provide intercity services, and I win the election. That's all. I don't give a damn about the farmers in Iowa. I don't give a damn about fishermen in Maine. I don't give a damn about people who are making jewelry in Arizona. I don't have to care about any of them. I just have to appeal to this one constituency, and I become chief executive. And furthermore, the Democrats become the ruling power in the country. People need to understand that the Electoral College is a mirror image of the idea of the bicameral legislature that we have, where you have two competing interests. On one hand, yes, absolutely, every single individual vote should count, and every single person's vote should be represented, and it is. We have a body called the House of Representatives, which is apportioned according to the population, so that a big state has a lot more throw in the House than a little state does. However, individual states have to have some kind of reason to want to join this federation, because if I'm Rhode Island, let's say, or Wyoming, and I'd agree to become part of the United States, and my understanding is that I'm going to get outvoted on everything all the time, then why on earth would I want to become a part of this criminal organization? And so there has to be some balance. And so in the Senate, each state has 2 votes. And before the 17th Amendment destroyed this country, those votes were determined by the legislature of the state, which meant that a senator from Alabama was not representing the people of Alabama, because the people of Alabama are represented by the representatives sent there by the people of Alabama. The senators from Alabama were supposed to represent the state, represent the interests of the state, protect the rights of the states against the federal government. And when the 17th Amendment, pushed by progressives, made voting for senators part of the popular vote, now they're essentially just super representatives, and really, Scotty, there's no reason for the Senate. It's a House of Lords now. The entire purpose of the Senate was to protect the power of the states as a political entity, and when that was destroyed, all of the power that should have been reserved to the states became concentrated in the federal government, and now we have a $25 trillion deficit.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we get a lot of feedback from members at BillWhittle.com, not just direct feedback or comments on the episodes that we post, but we actually have a member blog at BillWhittle.com where people can express their own ideas. I've received several emails recently from people who contested some things they've heard on our shows. And my response to them wasn't sit out and shut up. My response was, hey, that would make an excellent blog post on the new member blog at BillWhittle.com. Why don't you put it up there?
And perhaps a topic for future Bill Whittle Nows. You know, I mean, we'd love to do that. I think it's a grand idea.
But I do want to applaud the New York Times and read this one little comment at the bottom, because and Sean Willentz, the Princeton professor, who ends his article by saying,
former Princeton professor.
Yeah, former Princeton. But he says the myth that the Electoral College began as a slaveholder's instrument needs debunking, which I hope to help with in my book's revised paperback edition. So at the bottom of the New York Times column, it says, the Times is committed to publishing a diversity of letters to the editor. We'd like to hear what you think about this or any of our articles. We encourage you to let the Times know what you think of that article, and we encourage you to let us know what you think about the shows at BillWhittle.com.
And can I say one thing just to add to this specific point? I have no doubt whatsoever that I would disagree with this professor on a large number of issues, if not all of them. But for him to have the intellectual honesty to stand up and say, no, this is what the facts are, this is what the truth is. Guys like that, that's what America's about. Disagreement between people who have some sense of reason and can be convinced by a better argument. When the left makes a better argument, then I'll become a leftist. I'm not waiting. And
you would certainly disagree with him, because he's actually not giving a ringing endorsement of the Electoral College. He's just saying it's not racist. Yeah, in fact, he says that we may want to take a look at the Electoral College because it resulted in such a demagogic figure being elected in 2016. But it's not because of racism.
And I'm not going to extend this by another 20 minutes, but what is interesting, when we were talking about this, I had not had this thought. I really hadn't. But essentially, there should not be a national vote for president counted. It's irrelevant. I almost thought, it's like, why do we have this statistic? We don't need them both. We have this idea that, okay, well, does the Electoral College win or the popular vote win? The popular vote for president shouldn't even be counted. What is counted is how did each individual state vote? Because if you have 14 million votes for one person in California and 11 million votes for another in California, then that's going to determine or help determine the president of the United States. But the popular vote for president is what's causing all this confusion in the first place. It's an irrelevant number. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, on the Sportscast, as you've pointed out before, they don't say the Cowboys beat the Eagles 27-21, but the Eagles beat the Cowboys by 13 first downs versus 7.
Yep, because next time we'll play for first downs.
That's right. Ladies and gentlemen, we are always playing to win here at BillWhittle.com, and you are the ones that make it possible for us to do so. We appreciate the members who have gone to BillWhittle.com and clicked that Become a Member link. If you haven't done it yet, now's the time. So for Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members for making it happen.